Wow, the critical reception has absolutely bewildered me. They are 20 years late. I've always thought Saw was cinema, and the critics have finally caught up with people like me and people like you, because you watching me talk about Saw. So clearly, Saw got some juice in the horror industry. So I am absolutely ecstatic for the reception, but I'm also glad to say that I myself think the movie's bona fide cinema as well. My actual score I'll leave to the total end. And before I get into how I feel about the movie, I do want to break down the movie a bit. I know you've probably seen plenty of those pretty much throughout the weekend of its release, but I'm going to get a little bit more detail oriented. I'm going to try to spill as much point by point events of the movie before I get into my questionnaire and my interesting tidbits that I want to add, because there's so many things they've added to this movie that can be springboarded in the future without necessarily damaging anything that have come after this movie, right? So let's get it. The movie starts with John during an MRI scan, so it's clear he is still taking care of himself and fighting his cancer. So even after the events of Saw 1, he absolutely still is fighting for his life. He didn't forget that. He's not overcome by his work. You know, he's not too obsessed with his work that he forgot about his cancer or everything is his work. It's good that the movie starts with that because it's pretty clear that he still has the survival instinct intact. The doctor implies he should just retire peacefully, which Kramer scoffs at by stating, "So you want me to die easy?" We all know that's the last way you would describe the way he ultimately dies in Saw 3. Anyway, we see John at a cancer support group where he meets Henry Kessler, a fellow cancer survivor that suggests to John the Peterson Project website, where he supposedly found a treatment for his cancer. Kramer does small research into Finn and Cecilia Peterson before signing up for this special treatment. Cecilia, as the head of the operation, calls Kramer and tells him that they have openings for 3 months from that date. But it's clear to her that he doesn't have that much time to live. Then she states they have an off-grid location in Mexico and that she can fit another person for a set of operations happening a week later. Kramer agrees and goes to Mexico, but in what seems like a carjacking of sorts, 2 masked men capture Kramer to bring him to where the Mexico operation is. After meeting and speaking to Cecilia about the treatment, medical procedure, and his career, the surgery takes place to amazing results, according to Peterson. While he was still bandaged and recovering, he decided to buy a parting gift to give to those who treated his cancer. As he survives, the house is empty, with all the house pictures thrown on the floor like props. So, as he continues to see the rest of the house, he enters the procedure room and discovers the real-time footage of his brain operation was really a recording. Kramer is absolutely devastated, so he calls on his 2 main associates. And I love if you really pay attention to that. It's actually a fake recording of an operation that they try to make it seem was in real time, which is absolutely amazing considering that Saw 2 touches on that and how maybe that's how he got the idea. He got tricked with it. I'm sure he could trick others with that. He could trick a whole SWAT and a whole FBI unit, detective unit. So I thought that was great to really consider. So now moving on to the middle of the movie, essentially. And of course, if you really want every bit of detail, watch the movie. I feel like this is information that's very poignant and very important to know. And I feel like I have the wherewithal to break this down. So again, I might skip a few moments that I don't feel are key to what I'm referring to or what I'm talking about, but please watch the movie in its entirety. It's incredible. Kramer calls Detective Hoffman to help him find the people who scammed him. So after gaining that intel, he and Amanda begin to collect the scammers one by one. Hoffman gets Kessler, who we find out in the post-credit scene, the man who suggested the scam operation, back in the States while the Mexico game is taking place. And we'll talk more about that in the post-credit scene. Kramer grabs the taxi driver, who was also the fake surgeon who operated on John. He places him in a game where his hands are taped with knives piercing out of each hand, while each forearm is strapped with small ticking time bombs. He actually survives, so we see Amanda capture Mateo at his actual job as a veterinarian. Then we see Amanda capture Valentina while she was being sexually assaulted, and Gabriella while she was in the bathroom taking her drugs of choice. Seems like some pills of sort. Finally, both Amanda and John capture Cecilia Peterson at her residence, where we see her trashing a picture of Kramer amongst a stack of many others she scammed. Now the location of the games is set, where Peterson's group was located, as she told him before that it used to be a chemical factory. Valentina is the first to be tested with the Jilly Saw trap, as she has to use it to cut her leg off and to use a suction tool to pull enough blood to pull the lever down, but she loses her head. Literally, quite literally. Now it's time for Gabriella's test, but Amanda tells Kramer sometimes we do things that's against our nature, referring to Gabriella's and her own history of drug use and what she was willing to do to get her fix. But Kramer retorts that she had her own free will, and Amanda seems not to be confident she can take over without Kramer. But while this is happening, Dr. Cecilia Peterson starts to stab the body of Valentina to retrieve her intestines to build a rope. Her aim is to pull the cart that was left behind by Amanda and Kramer in order to use the phone to call for help. What I do love about this is exactly what Amanda had to do in the reverse bear trap. She had to pull and find the key, and she was pulling out all the intestines, so it was a great callback to that scene. So pretty awesome that they were able to make such a crazy scene. Even the person next to me in the theaters was like, what the hell? Oh, damn, this is crazy. So using the intestines, she successfully pulls the cart, grabbing the phone and able to use it. At this point, we don't know who she called because she ain't calling the cops, obviously. So right after she begins speaking to whoever she called, Amanda electrocutes her, reminiscent of Saw 1's trap. Shortly after, one of the fellow patients in the scam, Mr. Sears, abruptly appears on location to get his money, as he is claiming he has been scammed as well. He enters the chemical factory with a gun, but Amanda was able to hit him with a metal pipe from behind. So after he wakes up, he says that the Peterson group are a bunch of crooks and that was all his money for his family. Amanda tells Kramer that if he found them, it wouldn't be too long before someone else found them. Then Kramer says, just giving Sears a chance to make his choice. He explains the rules of Sears' game, which is no guns are allowed, and places it in a nearby locker right behind Sears. Then Amanda lets Sears out of his chair. Now it's time for Gabriella's game, but Amanda states Mateo's going first and leaves the room. Mateo is unable to survive his head surgery trap, so we get to see Amanda and Kramer have an emotional conversation about the fact that he is dying and that he believes she can take over. Finally, it's time for Gabriella's game, where she is hung up via a shackle on one of her ankles and the other on one of her wrists, with like a radiator gun aiming at her face. So she has to break each of those limbs to be set free. Miraculously, she survives the trap, but while that's happening, Sears has taken Kramer and Amanda at gunpoint and lures them down to the lower floor where the games are being played. Now the climax. As the climax is about to begin, we discover that Mr. Sears has had a relationship with Dr. Peterson as he is kissing her and lets her go. She slaps Amanda and Sears tells Kramer to get into the game that would have been designed for Cecilia. So Kramer wraps the metal shackle around his neck and locks it. Kramer tells Peterson that they need to call the ambulance for Gabby, but instead she places her foot on her neck and kills her via a head stomp. Amanda screams in agony while they force her to lock her ankle into one of the shackles from Gabby's game, I believe. Dr. Peterson begins to brag that she was able to outsmart Jigsaw, and she says she was happy to see each person die as she now has less people to split the money with. Sears suggests putting Amanda in the other shackle required to start the final game, but suddenly a young boy named Carlos, who Kramer first met during his scam treatment, begins to hit a soccer ball against the factory walls as he likes to do early morning. Peterson decides she wants to punish Kramer by placing an innocent person in his game, so she chains Carlos into the other shackle. Amanda asks, "Who's that?" when Carlos walked in, and Kramer responds, "A friend, a terrible, unforeseen consequence." Now it's time to play the final game while Kramer pleads to Peterson not to do this. Kramer grabs a hold of Peterson until Sears threatens to slice Carlos' throat. So the only choice to have is to play the final game with Carlos. Both shackles are pulled down to force both participants to lay on their backs while blood is poured directly on their faces. Peterson says, "Not waterboarding, huh? Bloodboarding." There's a lever that each participant pulls in order to tilt the floor of the trap up or down. Carlos refuses to let Kramer die even after Kramer tells him no hala, which is not to pull in Spanish. So Sears books it upstairs to get the money. Peterson follows him when Sears begins to question her on who would have been the second player in her final game if he never saved her. She activates the final game by pulling out the bag of money. The iconic Zepp track plays as the door to the upper floor closes and the blood stops spewing from the pipes of the game Kramer and Carlos are in. Amanda had the ability to get out at any time, and it appears Kramer did as well. So she rushes to remove Carlos' neck shackle. We see Kramer tinker with Sears' gun before he woke up after Amanda had hit him with the pipe. Then we see that Kramer interrogated the taxi driver from the scam operation. Hoffman was able to get information on Mr. Sears and all the other victims. And Amanda and Kramer purposely left behind that phone as they knew Peterson would call Sears the first chance she got. Now the tape to their game plays to instruct them that they must fight each other in order to see who will survive. You have played your last con game, but not your last game. The room appears to be filled with skin boiling steam with only one hole that should fit only one head until the game is over. They fight to the death while Kramer decides to give the money to Carlos, and they leave the factory as it appears Peterson has won her game. Game over. So wow, what a movie. The movie ends on an incredible note. Of course, high octane ending just like any other Saw movie. So in that regard, I absolutely loved it. I thought the twist was more akin to Saw 3's twist and not necessarily Saw 1 and 2's. But like I mentioned earlier with the operation, that's a twist in of itself. The fact is that the entire operation was bullshit, and they were able to use, pre-recorded footage from something that was not even relevant to his case, just good enough material to get away and to scam John Kramer, which was absolutely crazy to see. So in that way, I thought the twist works really well. The movie has little twists throughout the movie, like Gabriella's death, Carlos's entry, the fact that Sears and Peterson had a relationship. So definitely more akin to Saw 3's twist. It's not as good, of course, as the twist from 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that's actually a big reason why I believe you should watch those movies before you ever watch Saw X. You don't want Saw X to preemptively spoil the twist of Saw 4. You don't want it to preemptively undo the twist of Saw 1 and 2, right? Saw 1 sets up Amanda. Saw 2 shows you that she's actually one of his biggest or the biggest associate he has, right? So I believe for any newcomer, they should be watching Saw 1 through 4 at least before watching Saw X, but it works perfectly for the timeline that it's in. It's just the fact that it shows you Amanda and Jigsaw's relationship. It shows you Hoffman. You don't want to see these things before, like newcomers. If you're watching it with somebody new, watch Saw 1 through 4 before putting on Saw X. We are back in the iconic bathroom where we see Hoffman and Kramer have captured the man who started this spiral in Henry Kessler. They have placed him in a game hanging from the roof with a device attached to his chest that has multiple metal claws cutting away at his stomach. Right before that happens, Hoffman tells him, of all the men to cheat, you chose John Kramer. I call that epic bad luck. And the camera spirals to the final credits. Wow. So now we're definitely up to my area where I question certain aspects of it, and not in a critical way, but more like in a futuristic way, because Saw 11 is pretty much confirmed. $13 million budget, worldwide box office of about $30 million. So it's already made its money back in its opening weekend. You presume it's going to make more money as Halloween continues, as other people haven't seen it with all this critical reception. The highest rated Saw movie ever. And it's just, I chalk it up to the critics being late. Some people are saying Saw X is overhyped. No, it's just the fact is that Saw X isn't the best movie in the franchise, but it's high quality stuff. So if you think Saw X is an 87, the reality is that Saw 1, it should be in that realm. Saw 2 should be in that realm. Saw 3 should be in that realm. Saw 4, I believe, should be in that realm. I believe most of them. Saw 6 should be in that realm. Saw 5 is very good. Saw 7 is very good if you eliminate Gibson. He really brings that movie down. Like, his acting sucks. But besides that, the traps are really good in Saw 3D. Hoffman's incredible as a slasher. We get to see someone die in a reverse bear trap. Jigsaw's wife dies, so it shows you Hoffman was no easy opponent for Jigsaw either. So now, let's get to my first question. Is there significance to what Kramer tells Dr. Peterson before his surgery, quote unquote? He tells her while pointing to a radio tower and states, "My son is set to rise again," right after a scene of him writing his will. Could this be a reference to Carlos? Or is the scene implying that Kramer has his own DNA locked in his will? So has he impregnated another woman besides Jill? That is an incredible line to say, "My son is set to rise again," knowing that Gideon has died in his history with Jill. "My son is set to rise again" is definitely a double entendre and it isn't just a throwaway line. I believe that will come to head. Because remember, right after he bought that parting gift, he started writing that sketch with the radio tower 70 degrees. I don't believe that ever plays ahead in the movie. It's definitely a tease for a future. So I don't know if that Carlos is what he's referring to as his son rising again. This was way before that, so I don't think he assumed Carlos was going to be so important in the game. So I don't believe it's about Carlos either. He might be referring to an actual son, but I don't know in what context he's referring to. A son in terms of a person he's raised and supported, or actual biological. Is it a biological son? Is a son we don't know about? So that'd be very interesting how they're able to wove this in. And remember, he did write that will. So who is the will left for? I know Jill was left a box, the key. So she got a bit of it. But that's not the entirety of his bill. And that was more of his lawyer. That wasn't his will. One thing I do want to mention, if you guys didn't notice, there are no Billy the Puppet videos for the traps. Instead, we have Kramer and Amanda present. So it could definitely speak to the sporadic nature of this game. He didn't have enough time to record this. You know what I mean? It's a matter of time. Which also explains why the games themselves were not too mechanically sophisticated, as we know how some can be. That's another thing. You saw Saw 3, Saw 2, these games do get elaborate and they get complicated, but it's a matter of time. He didn't own that chemical factory that was used. It's about efficiency at this point. So, in other words, he didn't expect to get scammed. Number 4, does John visit Finn Peterson after Saw X to extend his life just a bit longer, which explains how he was able to last until the events of Saw 3. Because, as we know, Saw 2 comes shortly after this movie, and we're going to see him in a chair with an IV attached to his arms, of course, to his body. He wasn't pushing his way in a wheelchair without any assistance. So, as you saw, his condition is going to drastically dwindle down. We all know that Cecilia Peterson survived at the end of it. You assume the first call she does is to her father. Is Finn Peterson going to be a future character we will see again? And we'll see where Cecilia Peterson's fate, or what she has been up to. How did Cecilia figure out he was Jigsaw? I believe it was his voice. She alludes to it. She says, "Oh, say your scary voice." Plus, it could be the moment Billy the Puppet rode into the scene from a Tales game. So she didn't see any tapes of Billy the Puppet, but she actually got to see Billy in the flesh. So I do believe that did touch on the newscast and so on, even Billy the Puppet's face. So she definitely was able to discover and recognize at that moment, oh my God, that's the famous guy that's known as Jigsaw. Capturing Peterson at her home was crucial as they obtained some of the scam earnings and used it as a bait in the Kramer game. So the money was a huge element to the game. Kramer has money. He ain't going to steal that money. But he knew how crucial it was in order to get Sears and Peterson stuck into that room. It was hook, line, and sinker at that point. Another interesting tidbit is there's so many variations of how you can see the ending, and I do love that. You can see they initially place Amanda in one of Gabriella's shackles, with Sears suggesting that, just throw Amanda in the other shackle. That could have been what was planned initially. So Carlos walking in was definitely an unforeseen circumstance, which Kramer alludes to. So the plan was definitely to have Amanda be the second player in that game. But as you all know, Kramer told Sears he was in the game. So I believe ultimately Sears was going to be placed into their game. Either way you look at it, Sears and Peterson was going to be placed against each other. They were going to fight each other in order to survive, no matter how you see it. So you can see how many permutations of so many ways it looked like. So then the moment Carlos locked in, Peterson's evil fucking DNA kicked in, and she placed somebody who, we've all had debates about semi-innocent folks like Rig or other characters, but no one's even touching the innocence of a child, right? I thought that was an incredible twist and something you definitely didn't expect to be so important in the end. So if Sears would have admitted fault, his final test would have been to be the second player in the final game that was played by Kramer and Carlos. Number 8. Carlos wasn't supposed to be placed in the game, as Kramer says something about unforeseen circumstances happening. But he's a warrior, exactly like he says, so he earned that money. So before we get to number 9, I definitely want to add one right here. Boom. Is there any chance Carlos is William Shank? But before I get to that, after the game is over, Cecilia Peterson survived. So where has she been? Has she become convinced of Kramer's moral code? Wow. Cecilia Peterson, Tobin Bell's number 1, of course, in this movie. He outshined everybody, but Cecilia Peterson outshined everyone after that. Amanda did an amazing job, so I don't know. Amanda did her thing too. But Cecilia Peterson, wow, for a new character, the first time you saw her, she stood out. She was evil. She was essentially a mixture of Xavier, somebody who's willing to do whatever she needs to survive, plus Kramer, someone who has the intellect to come up with conniving ways and to use her innocence, She still is trying to lie to Kramer, even after Kramer figured out all her scams and everything. So she uses all her tools, her emotional manipulation, her communication manipulation, all her ways to manipulate. So Cecilia Peterson didn't give a shit about everyone dying. She was happy to collect all the money with Sears. Even killing Sears in the end, you could see that was totally in the cards because Peterson is a survivor first. So it's like having the survival instinct isn't everything, right? Because you could still be an evil piece of shit and still have the survival instinct. We don't know if she appreciates her life after all of this. Maybe. I know she should be humbled. She thought she outsmarted Jigsaw, but psych. So she should definitely feel humbled. So it all depends how she takes this. Is she going to still have like a moral opposition to Kramer? And we can see that play ahead in the future. Or does she become convinced of Kramer's work? And we're ultimately going to see that. So, number 10, is there any chance Carlos is William Shank? And I asked that legitimately because, of course, we don't even know this guy's last name, really. We already assumed it was Emerson. It went to Shank. So, William could definitely be his name, of course, but you can't trust this guy at all. So Carlos could definitely be William, and that actually adds credence to the spiral killer character. It explains how he has all this money and he has some warehouses. He has a bunch of assets. So it explains a bit of that, how he got that. So it definitely could be that Carlos is William Shank before he moved to the States, I asked all these questions because we will be getting another Saw. We're getting Saw 11. That's pretty much confirmed. Box office, again, 30 million. Critics' reception is up there. They'll be crazy to not release another one. So it will be coming out. And now I believe it will be steamrolled ahead too, considering that the writer's strike has been over and we're hoping that the Actors Guild, they're meeting today, I believe, that strike is over really soon. And you assume that it's imminent because they have at least some of the ideas of what they're going to be shooting for. Very similar. You can't be replaced by AI, higher pay, better protections, So they have some of the preludes from the other negotiations. Although, of course, every negotiation is its own. So we still got to wait for that to happen. But I guarantee you, as soon as that's up, they're going to be trying to rush this through and try to get the Saw 11. So, will we finally get an answer to if Hoffman died in the end of Saw, the final chapter? That has to be answered eventually. We just need to see that. Hoffman looks incredible. Costas Mandalore looks great. They can definitely play with the timeline and not play with the timeline. Whoa. Please don't Halloween this. They could play around where they want to jump because he looks great. It will all fit, And Amanda looked great. So some people kept commenting on how she looked. The wig, of course, looks funky, but remember her hair grows a bit after this. So it makes sense that it would be kind of like like a bowl before it gets a bit longer. So it makes sense. But besides the wig, she looked great. But we definitely need to get a definitive answer if he's dead in this timeline or not. Because now in the future timeline, it's really sporadic, right? We got a Logan who's alive. We got a William Emerson inspired killer, William Shank or Carlos Shank, whatever the hell you want to call him. We got the Dr. Gordons of the world. So what is happening in this future timeline? So what are we doing? And if Amanda's going to be alive, Horror Source, I recommend watching them. They're pretty awesome. The male host alludes to a theory of Hoffman saving Amanda, which could actually work. They never definitively said Amanda was dead. They never show you the body. And Amanda, actually, if you really consider it, Hoffman would be the one to have moved the body, you know? We only saw Amanda on the floor after Strom was caught. But after Strom was caught, we got straight to Hoffman talking to Fisk outside, and he said nobody survived. But they didn't confirm if they got Amanda's body, right? And I don't think any movies confirmed that or alluded to it or spoke on that fact. So if anyone could have done it, of course, the only one who could have done it was Hoffman. Why would Hoffman do that? I have no idea. And they would have to explain that portion of it. But physically, practically, Hoffman would be the one to do it, and it would make the most sense. You know what I'm saying? So that would be pretty sensational. They were speaking under like underestimating it, but the female host, as she was saying it out loud, she was like, wait a minute, that kind of could work. It kind of makes sense. So if Hoffman can manipulate Amanda to make her think that he actually was protecting her and that it was to show her that Jigsaw don't give a shit about her and that she was placed in another game, and Amanda, of course, would be like, God damn, another game? 3 games? Yeah, fuck Jigsaw, fuck this whole moral code and all of that, and maybe Hoffman got it on his accord. We don't know that, but hey, it could work, man. If we keep on, this video is not gonna end, man. So more videos will be coming. Thank you guys so much for your support. I'm sorry for the delay, but I wanted to think about this long and hard. I wanted to watch it multiple times, and I finally got this out there, and I appreciate you guys watching these videos, and like, comment, and subscribe, and can't wait to see you guys again.